I try to keep things simple for my brain, and so for the writing and language on the SAT, which is really the equivalent to the English on the ACT, I try to boil it into two different kinds of questions. One are context questions, which have to do with what's going on in the text and around the particular underlined portion, and then grammar questions, which usually the difference is grammar questions don't have a question mark in the question. It's just asking you if what's underlined is correct as it's written or not. If it's correct as it's written, you pick A or F. If it's incorrect, you correct it with one of the other choices. A few main types of context questions. You have placement questions where they're asking you, where something goes. Typically for those, you're going to look for time words, like maybe the word now shows up, or maybe the word finally, something that gives you an indication as to what came right before it or comes right after it. Demonstratives are this, that, these, those. So if it says something about, that bicycle, then you would know that the sentence that came before it would be about a bicycle. That's how most placement questions go. Transitions, these are, howevers and consequently's and next of alls and all kinds of transition words. My suggestion is read the sentence that comes before the transition, read the sentence that comes after it. There is a relationship between those two sentences, which is why there's a transition word. And then you pick the word based on that relationship. A word of advice, if there is a however as an answer choice, read it first. Because usually if there's a contrast in there, you can feel it easily. Next, addition, deletion. So the author might add a certain thing or might delete a certain thing. Similar suggestion to transitions. Read the sentence before. Read the sentence that you're either adding or skip the sentence that you're deleting, and then read the sentence after. And you're just trying to feel like, yeah, that fit in there. So then you'd pick from the yes answer choices. And if you're like, nah, that didn't really make any sense, then you'd get rid of the yes ones and pick one of the no ones based on the rest of the information is there. Logic question, these are really important, like a money maker strategy. Anytime you see a question and it's asking you, which of the following phrases most dramatically emphasizes the the way the sunlight was hitting the mountain or something. Well, what that means is that one of the answer choices is dramatic, and you got to find the dramatic one and pick it. So even if it ends up sounding or feeling weird to you and it's a phrase that you would never use, if it's the most dramatic one, then that's the one you got to pick. So the strategy in the logic question is just answer the actual question. Match the words from the question with the answer choice words in a way where they fit together like a puzzle, and just keep it logical. Word choice questions, a lot of times they'll give you answer choices that all kind of have the same meaning. Usually there'll be one that's too informal, and there'll be one maybe that has a second meaning that ends up being the correct answer. So if I said the word currency, you might immediately think that I'm talking about money. But if I said an idea gained currency, well, that's a second meaning. It means that it's currently, hip or active. Concessions, if you might hear concessions and think concession stand and that's Snickers and Coke. Well, that's true. There's another word for concessions. Like if people are negotiating, the stuff that you give away in a negotiation is called a concession. And so you just got to beware of like double meaning words. But generally you're going to kick out informal words and end up picking the word that fits best or flows best in the context. Moving down to grammar, a lot of just really specific things. I mean, there's certain grammar points that a lot of students struggle with. One of those is commas. There's comma questions all over the place on both of these tests. If you're on a commas question and there's an answer choice that has no commas, my suggestion is read it first. If that flows and it sounds fine and you read it without any slowing down or pausing, if it flows, pick it. Oftentimes a no commas answer choice is the correct answer. Remember that a comma does not equal a period. So just because there's a pause from a title versus a positive, and a positive is when you have a phrase set apart by commas that comes after a noun. So like the engineer, comma, Derek Smith, comma, built a bridge. That's in a positive. So engineer is the subject of the sentence. Derek Smith is the appositive. But there's a way to do that where you put no commas. So if I said the engineer Derek Smith built a bridge with no commas, well, now that word engineer is the title for Derek Smith, which is then the subject of the sentence. So oftentimes you'll see questions like that. And again, a lot of the time, the one with no commas ends up being the correct answer. Remember, apostrophes signal the possessive. Birds just means more than one bird. Birds mean one bird own a nest, a bird's nest. Birds means more than one bird owns a nest, the bird's nest. Birds is not a word. Remember that it apostrophe s always means it is. It's not a possessive, it's a contraction. The possessive neuter singular is its with no apostrophe. Its questions turn up on both of these tests virtually every single time. Semicolons function a lot like a period. They go in between complete sentences. So if you see a semicolon as an answer choice, frankly, they are not the answer very often. Not never, but if you see a semicolon as a choice, it's probably not the answer. But a way that you can tell that for sure is read the sentence to the left and see if it's a complete sentence with a subject and a verb, and then read what comes to the right. See if it's a complete sentence with a subject and a verb. If it is, then the semicolon could be the answer. Typically, that's not what's going on. A semicolon is this one, by the way, like a comma with a period above it. A colon is the ... one. Colons function like equal signs, so a lot of times you'll have something on the left that's general, and then you'll have a colon, and you'll have the specific thing that general thing was talking about. So, like, there is one secret ingredient to every rain cloud, colon, dust. See how dust is the specific secret ingredient that they were talking about over here. Really, like, the secret ingredient equals dust. You'll never see a colon with a such as. That's one thing they do sometimes. You'd never see, the phrase such as followed by a colon and then a list. That's not how they do it. Dashes, that's, that guy. Come in pairs. Almost always, not always. Sometimes you can have a dash that starts a phrase that ends the sentence, but typically dashes come in pairs. If you see a dash in an answer choice, look around, look above it and below it. If you see a second dash, it is very likely the answer. Same thing is true with commas questions a lot of the time. If you have a comma that sets a phrase off, you got to end that same phrase with a comma. Parallelism just means that things in a list ought to match. They ought to go together. So you'd never see, verbs-wise, running, jumping, to play. That's not parallel. You'd see running, jumping, playing, or you'd see to run, to jump, to play. They got to match up. And you got to match apples to apples in terms of nouns. So you couldn't say, like, one of the greatest stories in the history of baseball is Hank Aaron. You can't say that because Hank Aaron is not a story. You've got to compare a story to a story. So you could fix that in one of two ways. One of the greatest stories in baseball is the story of Hank Aaron, or one of the greatest players in baseball is Hank Aaron. That's what parallelism is in a structure of a sentence. A lot of agreement questions on both of these tests. Usually it's subject-verb agreement. Sometimes you get pronoun and antecedent agreement. Antecedent just means the word that comes before that the he or she or it or they pronoun refers back to. A lot of times, you'll have a singular subject with a plural object to the preposition. So imagine if you had something like each of us is or are going to the mall. Each of us is going to the mall. Each of us are going to the mall. Most people think that are is correct, but that's not accurate. Do you see how we have a singular subject, each? You've got a preposition word right there, and then you've got a plural object to the preposition. This prepositional phrase right here, you can really get it out of the way. That's what this says right here. Prepositional phrases, get them out of the way. If you see a prepositional phrase, just scratch it out. Each is singular. Each is going to the mall. Think each one. Each one is going to the mall. Each one of us is going to the mall. Each of us is going to the mall. You can't say each are going. That doesn't work for subject-verb agreement. Redundancy is when you unnecessarily repeat words or phrases. I'll show you, there's tons of redundancy questions on both tests, but a whole bunch on the ACT usually. When you see a redundancy style question, if you see an answer choice that is physically shorter, I mean like it's 1 or 2 words instead of 5 or 6 words, oftentimes that signals that you're on a redundancy question and the shortest answer is going to be correct. That's one of those that I can't really overemphasize. Shorter is better a lot of the time in grammar because it's succinct. On the SAT, they have combining sentences questions, and on those, the shortest answer is going to be correct without fail. Pick the short one if they're asking you to combine 2 things. A dangling modifier is when you have a prepositional, a participial phrase or something like hanging out in front of a noun. So, dotted with pen-sized knobs, Mr. Smith saw the miniature cabinet. Well, your brain probably knows the cabinet is what has pen-sized knobs, but because this phrase is sitting next to this noun, what this actually says is that I am dotted with pen-sized knobs. That's called a dangling modifier. It's not placed with the noun that is modifying. So you could rephrase this as Mr. Smith saw the miniature cabinet dotted with pen-sized knobs. Again, I'm going to show you examples of all these in a different video.